And I appreciate you giving me the synopsis that you did.
And we're anxious to discuss it. Let me just tell you that we have been aware of this activity, but you have to appreciate the fact that we are a three-member board, and when two of us talk, we're a quorum, which then is a FOIA issue. So bottom line is, we can't talk about this until we're here today. And so one of the reasons that we called this meeting was so that we could talk about it among ourselves in a public meeting, in a public forum. And while we're at it, let's hear from some other interested parties. I want to make a couple of comments to the board in your hearing. I think everybody understands and I hope appreciates the structure of the electoral process in Virginia. The State Board of Elections is appointed to a 4-year term, and the makeup of that is all structured by code. And then there are 134 local boards of elections appointed at the local level. The structure is such that the local boards of elections are somewhat autonomous from this board in that they conduct the local elections. Where there's multi-jurisdictions, then this board is involved, like you just heard about how we determine ballot order, this petition issue, that's multi-jurisdiction, so that rests with this board. When, and the good part about that is that it was set up that way for a purpose, and that is to have a clean, open, simple structure on how elections are conducted in the Commonwealth of Virginia. So I like the system, and I hope you do too. One thing that I've learned since being a part of this board is that there seems to be a new standard operating procedure that bothers me a little bit personally, and that is if a campaign can't achieve the goal, if they can't get enough signatures on the petition, if they can't achieve the goal, instead of doing what most successful campaigns do, they tend to litigate. And we go to court again to try to change the rules or declare the rules unconstitutional or this or that. And we've been through, this board has been through that a couple of times, and so I speak with experience. And I can just tell you that as one who has been involved in the process on all sides of a campaign, I'm troubled by that, because I see a deterioration of what is a really good system. Now, I want to say we have been asked by a particular campaign to take certain action. I want to start off and share with everybody here, with this board and everybody here, those who are very zealous and aggressive in getting folks registered to vote. We share that goal. We have the same goal as a board and as a staff to see that every eligible voter in Virginia participates in the process according to the rules and not skirting the rules or trying to change the rules midstream or going before a judge and say the rule is wrong, wah. So we share in the goal of wanting to see every eligible voter participating in the process, and I mean that from the bottom of my heart. Now, we've had discussions in this board about the integrity of that process. So part of our job, so I shared our goal, now part of our job is to protect the integrity of that process. And so this board prescribes certain forms that are used and procedures that are used that we're authorized by state law to do, and then those local autonomous boards then carry out those elections, and they do that. There's been a lot of talk about voter ID and the need for it, and some have referred to it as a solution looking for a problem, and others have said there's a real problem. Well, the bottom line is we care about voter ID to the point where the General Assembly added more opportunities and more vehicles and more IDs that can be used for voter ID. I don't know if you knew that, but they did, and we now have 9 different forms of identification to be used by the voters. See, so not only do we share in the goal, but I think we're doing everything we can to substantiate that and support that. All right, now we have been asked to take a look at certain activity that's been going on by an organization whose goal it is to well, with whom we share the goal, and that is to involve so many people in the electoral process. And they are using direct marketing techniques, direct mail techniques that I'm personally familiar with because of a business experience. And so I have watched this with interest. And I know there has been some concerns. There have been concerns raised about what would purport to be irregularities in that campaign. I can tell you that in the direct mail business, it pays to scrub your list. It pays to know to whom you're mailing because you're after results. And it doesn't pay to use lists that miss your mark in your target audience or your target market. In that whole process, I think some of that has been missed. And I will say I'm not trying to offend anybody, but I think it's been a fairly sloppy process. And I think that's been called to our attention. I'm particularly concerned when people who've called, in the last count we had 700-ish, probably more now, calls into the state board expressing concern, frustration, confusion about this mailing. Because it would say things like, according to our records, you are qualified to vote and you're not registered. Or according to our records indicate that you can vote. And they're sending it to a very sloppy list, which is not a true statement. They're not qualified. Morris the cat is not qualified to vote. And so, point taken. But here's what really bothers me, and I have to share it, and I have to get it off my chest. An individual called who received that form for his deceased mother, insensitivity. Another one for his wife and deceased mother-in-law. And another one at the business address for the brother who was deceased for several years. And another one for the 4-year-old child. Come on. And another one who never lived in Virginia, has never lived in Virginia, and is deceased. And yet that came to an address in Virginia saying, according to our records, you're qualified to vote. Husband is deceased. Another caller, but this one makes me say shame on you. A voter application was filled out and sent to an address in the name of an 8-year-old baby girl deceased. Shame. So, when I say sloppy, that's where I'm coming from. All right, now, turn the page and say this, that the SBE staff saw some, obviously being made aware of these concerns, saw some things that maybe we should tweak to say, rather you not pre-populate the form, because we believe that the individual is supposed to fill out that form. And I understand it increases the response rate and does all those things, but let's keep it clean and simple and not confusing. And then making some check marks, pre-populating the check mark that says I'm a citizen or I'm not a convicted felon, those kind of things that the applicant is supposed to do. Let's let them do it. Let's put that form in everybody's hands who's eligible and let them fill it out and help them with the process after that. And I'm happy to say, and this is the good news part of it, that the Secretary addressed that issue with the organization. And they, in writing, sent back to us and said, okay, we'll do that. Appreciate the fact that it may affect the response rate, but we'll do that. And I want to say to the organization, thank you for that, because that confirms the fact that we do, in fact, share in the goal. So that's where we are. Now we have a request from a presidential campaign, Romney for president, to maybe take it a step further. And I'm just going to speak now as one member of this board, not as the board, but as one member. I'm not sure we have the authority to do what we're being asked to do, which is why we have legal counsel from the Attorney General's office, who we consider the 4th member of this board because of his scholarship and wisdom, and that I want to ask to comment on this. But does any member of the board want to comment before we ask Mr. Lee for his unofficial opinion?
Mr. Chair, if I may, I would just like to speak to the VPC's efforts as well, and certainly commendable efforts. And as we all know, I think the question here is the intent of the organization. And certainly as we're looking at making this system transparent, as we're looking at making this certainly a nonpartisan issue, we want every voter who has the honest intention of registering to vote, having that vote being counted. Now, whether or not I receive that mailing and what I do with it from there, if I'm an honest intention voter, is where my concern lies. And I would like to echo some of the comments that I've received in between our last meeting and this meeting have been, but what about the people who are with good intention? We know that there were bad lists, we know that there were things that were sent out, but we still know that there are over tens of thousands of folks who are registered, and I would like to ensure that those voters are not disenfranchised. I do appreciate VPC's efforts as well as their response back to us, speaking to that pre-populated form. So I think the last thing we need to do is continue to turn voters away. Something else that our secretary spoke to during the last meeting is that these groups will be coming forward. And as we know, it's a highly contentious year. Certainly in Virginia, there are lots of groups that have specific interests in this matter. So this will not be the only time we see this, but I do want to go on the record for saying that I do not believe that we should disenfranchise those voters who are coming forward with those forms, filling it out appropriately, and getting it to the registrar's hands. I think we all know the three-person board, I think I can confidently speak for all of us that we appreciate the work that the registrars in the electoral board does each and every day to check over those forms, but to also ensure that the integrity of the vote is secure. So just would like to add in those comments in addition to what you've already stated.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think we all just need to take a step back a little bit and see our role in the process. Obviously, as an agency, we want to make sure that voters have every opportunity to register and vote, and that we facilitate that process and make it easy. On the other hand, part of this process is not to confuse the voter or to anger the voter. And in this case, I think the lines were lit up by voters and registered voters who, some were already registered, some, as the chairman points out, received this mailing and were very, very disappointed, as we became, because they were very confused, and that's not something we like as an agency, and I don't think anybody in this room wants that. And so I think there's a lot of lessons learned that the VPC should take from this, that that's important, and these are just not acceptable casualties of war. You know, these are our voters who are very confused, and it's only August, and I think that this is, in some ways, it's a silver lining that it's in August and not October, when the voter registrations will spike and general registrars will be very busy, and we really don't need to have deceased people, registrations being sent to all types of ineligible voters in the height of the voter registration process. And so I think that the silver lining here is that there's a lot of lessons learned, and that let's get our list clean. VPC in communication obviously let us know that they believe that their lists were strong and clean, and they were confident in that. Well, I think that, again, this is a lesson learned that there's some work to do. There's some work to do. And although I think that the organization believes that they got an accurate voter registration list for Virginia through a third-party vendor, they really need to come to us and ask for our voter registration list. I think that it's the most up-to-date registration list, and it should be the most up-to-date when it's sort of used with whatever process it is to identify voters. That being said, we've all read the request from the Romney campaign. In many ways, I'd like to express the general registrars in the electoral community, my confidence in them, that the processes in place will identify any ineligible voters. We have a very strong process in place. I have a lot of confidence in the general registrars that they will look at these. They obviously scrutinize these. In fact, many voters and individuals themselves scrutinize. That's why we heard such an outpouring of anger. They looked at it and said, "This is wrong. There's something wrong with this." And the registrars have the capability and the professionalism to review these applications like they do all applications. And they review it against the prohibitive list and all the different categories of ineligible voters, be they deceased, be they felons, be they non-citizens or not even a human. But that being said, they do this process, and so I'm confident that the registrars will take a look at these, like they take a look at all registrations. And again, this is August, where they have the time to properly process those, and it's not an avalanche of applications where speed sometimes makes your accuracy a little less. So I want to express that I believe that we're already going to scrutinize these applications, just like all applications, and they're going to go through the process, and if there's an issue, the registrars will pick it up, or the state will identify it and provide it to the registrars. Again, my concern has always been the confusion of the voters. It's never a good thing when you get thousands of phone calls on the local and state level where voters are confused about the process, and we're sort of left to pick up the pieces. And so I think that for all the good that comes out of a mailing like this, all steps should be taken to mitigate the problems that the organization should be aware of. They're not acceptable casualties of war. Registered voters shouldn't have to call in a panic to make sure the registration is okay because someone has sent them a pre-populated form with the name wrong or the address wrong, and they believed it's from the State Board of Elections or some other entity. It's something that they shouldn't have to put up with. That being said, we're here to sort of look at the situation and do what's legally required under the law.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Palmer. Mr. Lee?
That's the subject is what authority the board has, if any, over this. I do think under 24.2-104, if the board was aware that there was unlawful activity occurring or had a suspicion of unlawful activity occurring in the voter registration drive or voter registration activities, it does have the authority to request an investigation by the Attorney General. So I think you do have the authority to do that. Whether or not to do that is, of course, up to this board, but there is that authority. And were you asking me also to go through sort of the code sections, or I wasn't sure. I know you asked me what the authority was. What else may I say, Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry. I guess, to sort of bring this to we haven't had a real chance to talk about this as a board. I guess the first issue is do we really feel, do we feel this is potential criminal activity, or we just feel it's sort of part of the process which we're going to have to deal with and go from there, because there's a fine line here.
But Mr. Chairman, perhaps, I think to follow up on your question, that perhaps it would be helpful if I went through the code provisions that have allegedly, that allegations of which have been violated and have been made, and just kind of went through those briefly. Would that be of benefit to the board? All right, there are a series of statutes that have allegedly been violated according to the various correspondence in this, and there's been, of course, answers to those allegations. I would just initially state, and this is just, I guess this is my opinion, but reading the Code of Virginia as a whole, the vast majority of the burden for a person properly registering to vote is placed on the voter. So no matter what a form says in terms of pre-population, or no matter what, if the form says, if I get a form that says, spot leaf in the mail, and I sign that and affirm that I'm registering my dog to vote, I think it's clear under the code I'm committing a crime. So I think that when you look at all the provisions talking about voter registration and criminal activity, the vast majority, not all, but there's a lot of the focus is on the individual. So the examples that have been pointed out about receiving a voter registration form for an 8-year-old child or a deceased relative, etc., that would be something that someone should not sign that under the code. So even if the person, let's assume for the sake of discussion, it was innocently done or non-innocently done, we can just take VPC, pick a different group, send someone a form. Ultimately, someone is signing that form, and that is criminal if they submit a false voter registration application. With that as a sort of introductory background, There's a series of statutes that have been cited, but they all really, okay, starting with 1002.01, these are all 24.2. A person has to intentionally solicit multiple registrations. Okay? Intentionally solicit multiple registrations. That would be one factual scenario. So there's a group sending thousands of forms out, intentionally soliciting multiple registrations from a person. That's a factual question. 1004 talks about a person who intentionally procures, assists, or induces another to register to vote in more than one address at the same time. Again, so I think, again, that requires an intent. All these criminal codes require intent. So negligently or sending out a sloppy list that's negligently going to a bunch of people, arguably would not be criminal. That would not be up to, of course, a jury or judge to decide on. But based upon the language of the code, there clearly must be an intent to procure someone in registering more than once. Next code section cited is 1005.1. That one is clearly dealing with impeding the voter to exercise this right to vote. That code section is if you mislead someone as to their voter registration status to prevent them from voting, that's a crime. So I don't think that section is really applicable herein, because I don't think anyone that got these mailings would not vote. I think this is really more meant to get to someone showing up at the polls and perhaps someone saying, "Oh, you're not registered to vote, sir, don't vote," and sending that person home. That's what I think 1005.1 is meant to deal with. It's entitled communication of false information to a registered voter. 1016 is again a willfully false statement or entry made on a person or statement or form. This is really dealing with the registrant for the most part, although I guess if it could be proved that a group such as VPC was making willfully false material statements in this pre-population that's been discussed, then that could be a crime. 18.2-29 has also been cited, which is basically someone who solicits someone to commit a felony. So anyone that commands, entreats, or otherwise attempts someone to persuade someone to commit a felony is guilty of a felony. So that's the wide range of criminal sections that have been cited as possibly being violated here. And I think the facts, you're as aware of you have the state board staff has collected a factual summary of various things that have occurred, and I think it's up to the board to determine whether additional factual investigation is necessary or not based upon those facts.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Anything else from the board? Is there a representative here from VPC? Do you care to comment?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Secretary, and other officials of the board. Your pleasure, Mr. Chairman. I hope I can read a statement, given the fact that we're the star attraction here today. And then, of course, I'd be happy to answer any questions at the end.
Okay, state your name.
My name is Scott Thomas. I'm with the law firm Dixteen Shapiro in Washington, D.C. I'm here representing the Voter Participation Center. Seated behind me is Gail Kitch. She is the Chief Operating Officer. She's here to also help with any factual questions if necessary. For about 20 years, I guess, I was a commissioner at the Federal Election Commission, and I was there when they implemented the National Voter Registration Act and helped with the transition under HAVA to the Election Assistance Commission. So I have some familiarity with election laws, and I don't envy you having to implement a voter registration system. It is complicated, it is difficult, and I do think you're to be commended for having this hearing and giving people a chance to help you. That's why I'm here. I'm here to try to help you. I'll abbreviate the part of the written statement that I would like to put into the record. I hope that the full statement is before you. Let me just start by saying that as we all appreciate, the right to vote is fundamental in this country, and the ability to vote is dependent on being registered. There are over 73 million people eligible in this country to register who are not registered. including approximately 2 million in the Commonwealth of Virginia alone. For some folks, getting registered is not easy, and for working Americans, it's particularly difficult given life's priorities. The Voter Participation Center, or VPC as I'll call it for short, for years has worked to help people get registered, especially those who traditionally have been underrepresented, minorities, young people, and women who are unmarried. The VPC is specialized in helping people register through the use of mail-in registration forms. This is a process that has been authorized and encouraged in federal and state law for years. It's a time-proven method that provides a convenient and cost-effective way to register to vote. Over the last 8 years, VPC has used this technique to help register over 1.5 million Americans. And in the current year alone, VPC has been responsible for over 16,000 Virginians sending in voter registration applications, a substantial portion of new registration applications. So as I said, we're here to help you in your deliberations regarding the request put forward by the Romney for President campaign. They've asked you to either refer certain what we consider careless allegations to the Attorney General of the Commonwealth, or to undertake a separate targeted internal investigation of all those voter registration applications associated with VPC, as we urge this Romney campaign request, which we think is totally unfounded, should be roundly rejected. As the board knows, VPC has been conducting registration efforts in Virginia for several years, and VPC has worked closely with the board to make sure that the mailings use the proper format and provide proper notice and instructions to recipients. The board has been very helpful in providing suggestions about clarifications and improvements at each stage. VPC mails voter registration applications like those available on the board's website or at state service agencies. The individual recipient has the opportunity to either complete the form or not. If it is completed, the individual then mails it directly to the appropriate election office using prepaid postage envelope that is provided. The VPC does not process or see the registration application returned to the election officials. The mailings state expressly that if the recipient has already registered at his or her current address, there is no need to submit the application. The board's contact information is provided for recipients who might want to check their registration status. The form makes very clear who is ineligible to register, specifies that persons who are not citizens or who are too young must not complete the form, and requires information about any felony convictions. Clear guidance about how to be removed from the VPC mailing list also is provided in all mailings. Now, unfortunately, the list developed for VPC's mailing inadvertently contains some addressees who were deceased, not eligible to vote, already properly registered, or not real people. The VPC sincerely shares the concerns of the board about the problems with the list. But as we have explained at the board, VPC relies on the commercial vendors to develop a list of persons who appear to be unregistered but eligible voters.
30 seconds. 30 seconds.
Well, we go to great lengths to try to perfect that list. Of course, the biggest obstacle is there is no government-created list of who is not already properly registered. There's no available list, a complete list of who is deceased or who is not a citizen. So we have a great hill to try to climb in trying to screen out those people. We, of course, start with the voter registration list from the state. Our vendor did that in this case. They got the list in April for the June mailing.
Okay, your time is up. Can you wrap it up?
Yes, certainly. The bottom line we're coming to is we try to use through the vendor as many cleaning methods as possible, and we wanted you to focus on, we have recently come through with an additional 13 protocols, as they call them, that they're going to use to try to even further scrub the list, to do even better. Things that will try to prevent mailings going to deceased people and to ineligible people and to people who already are properly registered. So we're trying as hard as we can to come up with these kinds of protocols that will be helpful. We think that there have been unintended list mistakes, that we deeply regret those. We strongly urge that the Attorney General not be asked to investigate. We also strongly urge that the board not undertake a separate investigation of these 16,000 people who have already submitted these forms with the help of VPC. We think that would be a very problematic thing.
Okay. I think we need to stop and see if you can answer some questions from us.
Sure.
You said you're going to employ 13-ish protocols to scrub the list, and would one of those be the voter list from SPE?
It's my understanding that we did get the list from VVE.
But not SBE. You got it from a third-party vendor.
The third-party vendor, which is used, did get it from SBE.
Well, we just don't know when.
We understand it was in April.
Okay.
They used the April list to prepare the June mailing. And that's, of course, something we're happy to work with. We're happy to try to get that review of who is actually registered in the first place as current as possible. And we are always working in states to try to get the most current list available. We will redouble efforts in that regard, of course.
Well, we're pretty bullish about the quality of our list now. I use the word now because, you know, it's always improving, but I think that would eliminate an awful lot of the feedback that we've gotten.
Yes, as you can appreciate, there's no list that's perfect, and even your official list probably has on it something like a Scout Thomas, perhaps through a data entry error rather than a Scott Thomas. And I went through that once with a whole bunch of mailings coming to me as Scout Thomas, but that's the typical kind of data entry error that might be there. But we, of course, try to account for those kinds of matching issues as well. The commercial vendors that have been used by VPC have algorithms in place that goes through a long list of factors to try to screen out ineligible folks and people who are deceased.
Do you know what list your vendor uses to suppress deceased?
They do rely on the Social Security Administration list to the extent that's accurate. As you probably know, the last one that went out, they had to concede that over 1 million names of deceased people had to be left off because of the privacy concerns set out in the law. The state information that's sent to them has to be deleted from the list they then provide to folks because of privacy concerns. So that list by itself already has a shortage of over 1 million deceased persons, and that's the kind of problem that the Voter Participation Center and vendors like that run into as well.
Okay. Questions for Steph? Okay. Well, thank you for your thoroughness.
Thank you.
And you said you were on the Federal Elections Commission?
Yes.
For how many years?
Well, I was a commissioner for about 20 years, yes.
Years.
I was chairman 4 times. They were foolish enough to select me as chairman 4 times.
When on the board, did you have hair?
Were submitted in the last 2 months. We urge the board to fully consider the implications of any such action about the voting rights of Virginians. Deputy Secretary Reamer has already stated in the press that partially completed forms sent out by the Virginia Participation Center conflict with provisions of the Virginia Constitution and the Virginia Code. Accordingly, we are very concerned that any review of recent registrations may result in the automatic disenfranchisement of thousands of qualified voters who signed and submitted their applications truthfully and in good faith. The board must not permit such a result. The board's mission should be to broaden the franchise to the greatest extent possible and not to erect unnecessary barriers to the right to vote. The board should construe election laws liberally to protect the right of qualified voters in order to cast their ballots and to ensure that all properly cast ballots are counted. The Voting Rights Act, which supersedes any conflicting provision of state law, provides that an individual may not be denied the right to vote because of an error or omission on a registration, if such error or omission is not material in determining whether such individual is qualified under state law to vote in such election. The fact that a person's name and address is pre-printed on a registration form has no bearing on whether that person is qualified to vote and cannot be a reason to invalidate his registration. Finally, it is our understanding that the board may consider requesting the Attorney General to conduct a criminal investigation of the Voter Participation Center. The merits of such probe are dubious given that there appears to be no evidence that any registration errors resulted from willful or intentional conduct of the organization. In any case, the code specifically provides that any allegations of voting misconduct are to be referred not to the Attorney General, but to the attorney for the Commonwealth of the county or the city for which the alleged violation occurred, which is the county or city where the applicant sought to be registered. And that's 24.2-1019. Thank you.
My name is Joe Cook. I'm a registered voter from Norfolk and the local council organizer for MoveOn.org Hampton Roads. I come today on behalf of our 25,000 members in Virginia to call on you to reject the unfounded complaint from Mitt Romney, which requests that you investigate all voter registration forms submitted in the last 2 months. I'm echoing the message of 4,500 fellow MoveOn members in Virginia who have signed a citizen's complaint, which has been delivered to you today, and I have those right here that I will turn in to you, the 4,500 names of our members who have signed this complaint. It is important for you to hear that Virginians want you to accept every valid voter registration form that you have received. Blocking 16,000 qualified Virginians who submitted valid application registration forms from voting as the Romney campaign wants is an outrageous attack on a fundamental right of our democracy embodied in the Constitution. 2 million Virginians, as you know, are not registered to vote, and getting those folks on the rolls strengthens the fabric of our democracy. The board has a duty to deny a partisan political strategy, part of a nationwide effort to suppress the vote of certain groups, people of color, young people, and the poor, to gain an advantage at the polls. Over the last 18 months, more efforts to block access to the voting booth have been enacted than since the shameful days of the poll tax and literacy test. Former Governor Crist of Florida recently wrote an op-ed, which I quote, condemning zealots for imposing new restrictions on voting, overreacting to contrived threats of voter fraud by significantly narrowing the voter pool, end of quote. And the voter registration forms sent out by the Voter Participation Center were legal and approved by the state. And as you well know, no list of unregistered voters exists in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and building such a list is an imperfect process. And mailing list errors cannot be used as an excuse to squash the rights of thousands of qualified Virginians to register and vote, and to chill the efforts to provide an important service of getting more people to the polls. The work of VPC is essential in registering Virginians, and their efforts were successful with the submission of 16,000 new registration applications this year alone. A substantial portion, in fact, of the new registrations in the Commonwealth today. We cannot let the valid applications of the unregistered, the African Americans, Latinos, the elderly, the young, and the poor who want to vote in November, or any valid registration form, be denied here in Virginia or any other state. Thank you very much.
Chair and members of the State Board of Elections. This year, the Virginia State Conference, NAACP, through its national office, has partnered with the Voter Participation Center to send voter registration forms to potential Virginia voters. In all, we wanted to reach as many Virginians as possible in a massive enfranchisement campaign. To our voter registration program as the latest attempt to bully and intimidate potential voters and make it much more difficult for them to exercise this franchise. The Voter Participation Center has sent similar mailings in Virginia and around the country for years. In each state, including this one, the registration forms are sent to elections authorities for review before they are ever sent out. The staff of this very Board of Elections made minor revisions that were incorporated before the mailing, but otherwise raised no concerns about the forms or their distribution. Now, after 15,000 Virginians have returned their registration applications, there is an effort to question or perhaps even invalidate their eligibility. This is absolutely wrong. The state's approach in regulating the voter registration mailers raises a number of concerning legal and factual questions. We will be working with our attorneys to ensure that our rights are protected. For more than 100 years, the NAACP has fought for equal access to the ballot box for all Americans. We recognize this challenge to question or invalidate our voter registration initiatives for what it is: the latest attempt to stifle the voices of Virginia voters. And as we have for a century, we have fought and will continue to fight those who attempt to suppress our vote. Thank you.
Opportunity to address the board. My name is Anna Scholl. I'm the Executive Director of Progress Virginia, a nonpartisan advocacy organization that engages citizens from across the state to seek a better future for our Commonwealth. I'm here today to testify in support of the Voter Participation Center and their work to ensure that every eligible Virginian can cast a ballot that counts, and to oppose any efforts to obstruct this important work. I'd like to first reiterate the concerns communicated to you via letter last week from several Virginia civic organizations, including Progress Virginia. As we stated in that letter, should the Board of Elections acquiesce to the Romney campaign's attempt to intervene in lawful voter registration efforts, it would be in violation of its legal obligation to timely process voter registration applications and would cast a pall of confusion over new voters in Virginia. A refusal by the board to accept all lawful voter registration applications and an effort to remove newly registered voters from the rolls in a manner not compliant with the applicable state and federal law would only further confusion and serve to dissuade eligible Virginians from registering to vote. Today, you may be aware that we celebrate the anniversary of President Lyndon Johnson signing the Voting Rights Act, legislation to ensure all citizens have a voice in choosing our leaders. But 47 years later, over 2 million eligible Virginians are currently unregistered. Our democracy is strongest when every citizen participates, and the Voter Participation Center's work is essential to increasing participation. As has been mentioned earlier, you know there is no list of unregistered voters in the Commonwealth, and admittedly building such a list is an imperfect process. But mailing list errors are not an excuse to quash the rights of thousands of eligible Virginians to register. The request is seconded, however, by more than just the folks in the Romney campaign's request to restrict Virginians' right to vote. These 8,394 Virginians have taken action since just last Thursday to add their name to our request that you deny the Romney campaign's request to reject valid voter registration applications and that you work instead to ensure every eligible voter can cast a ballot that counts. Thank you very much for your time.
And we are here to support the Voter Participation Center. As has stated numerous times, there's insufficient evidence that violations of any section of the Code of Virginia have occurred to merit an investigation to the registration applications of the Voter Participation Center. We trust our registrars to thoroughly review all registration applications to determine their eligibility. To review the applications again of the 16,000 individuals that registrars have already deemed eligible just because they submitted an application through the VPC would not only threaten to disenfranchise those qualified voters, but would also undermine the trust and authority that we have instilled in our local registrars. The State Board has also been asked to review the last 2 months of registration applications regardless of how they were submitted. This is both time and resource intensive, especially at a time when the State Board, the local boards, and local registrars are all stretched with preparing for an intense November election in which Virginia is yet again, frankly, a battleground state. In addition to the usual rigors of preparing for a large-scale federal election that not only includes a presidential, a U.S. Senate, and all the congressional House races, the State Board must prepare for the implementation of a new voter ID law. That includes providing materials, resources to local boards, and also a massive public education campaign. The Department of Justice will provide its determination for pre-clearance on or before August 19th, leaving the State Board just about 2.5 months to educate the public. Given the limited capacity and resources, I feel that the State Board must prioritize the voter ID law, clarify all outstanding questions surrounding the implementation of the new law, provide the training and resources to all local boards and registrars, and embark on that massive public education campaign. Failure to adequately educate the public and properly implement the new voter ID law could potentially disenfranchise thousands of Virginians who qualify, especially given that many Virginians are misinformed that the new voter ID law in Virginia includes a photo ID provision. So there needs to be massive public education. As was mentioned this morning, we have a special election coming on September 4th in House District 45 and Senate District 5. House District 45 is extremely diverse and includes parts of Arlington County, Alexandria County, and Fairfax County, the latter of which is covered under Section 203, which means that they are mandated to provide materials in Spanish. In speaking to a number of registrars, and including the Fairfax office last week, some of those materials have not been provided in Spanish, and September 4th is right around the corner. So, given this limited capacity, the State Board decides to undertake this unnecessary investigation to the Voter Participation Center. I believe it's sending a message to many organizations that strive to increase voter participation. That message is that we are trying to embark on an unnecessary investigation rather than doing everything we can to make sure that voters have their votes counted on election day. So I encourage the State Board to reject the Romney campaign's requests. Thank you.
Board of Elections. My name is Kurt Jones. I'm a resident of Henrico County, and I have the honor of serving as president of the Central Virginia chapter of the A. Philip Randolph Institute. We were formed in 1965 with three primary purposes: voter registration, voter education, and voter participation. This morning I've been encouraged by the comments from the chair and the members of the board expressing confidence in the staff of the State Board of Elections. And also the chair is pointing out that we do have in the Commonwealth 134 general electors who are also well qualified and have been doing their job for some time. I see no reason for the board to take any action this morning that would counteract what the general electors in each of our cities and counties are doing every day. And that's reviewing voter registration forms, to determine the eligibility of the citizens who have submitted that information, and determine whether or not they're qualified to vote in the Commonwealth. I hope you will consider no additional action is needed today, because what needs to be done is being done every day in the Commonwealth. Thank you.
The chair and the elections board membership. My name is Dick Brown. I'm from Charlottesville, Virginia, and I'm kind of faking this because in this morning's traffic I thought I'd never get here actually. I've been listening attentively to everything that's been said, and I do not envy you the task that you have to do. I see this world as some shade of gray. It's not black or white. I think some points have been made on both sides. I do have a general sympathy, though, for trying to get more people to the polls, because I think the more of us that have this voice in our process, the better the situation is. And for that principle, it doesn't matter to me whether they're coming from one side or the other or somewhere in between. I guess I have a couple of questions. One, there's this old saw in criminal law to the effect that it's better maybe to let 10 guilty people go free than to convict one person unfairly. And I wonder how many voter eligibility suppressions are we willing to endure to find one faulty or illegitimate voter in the review. That's something to think about. I guess another thing, if we're concerned about how the integrity of the process not only is, but how it appears, how will it look when we get done with our deliberations for a complaint that was brought by a partisan organization in the throes of an election campaign that is going to tie this state in knots? It's something to think about. What I will add on a very positive note, I've done a little work myself in voter registration, and in the Charlottesville area at least, I have a very high regard for the people that you have doing the registrar's work and helping them. I wish you well in your deliberations. Thank you.
My name is Daquan Marcel Love, and I'm a student at Hampton University in Hampton, Virginia. I'm a lifelong resident of the Commonwealth of Virginia living in Henrico County, Virginia. And I also serve as the Youth and College Division President for the Virginia NAACP. And I stand before you today because I originally was not going to speak, because I am concerned about these partisan attacks on our voting rights. And it seems to me, where we are now, it seems as if I'm reading something from one of my history textbooks. And you, as the Board of Elections, have the power to ensure that we don't turn the clock back on our voting rights. The right to vote is very precious and very important. I urge you to not ask for an investigation by the Attorney General, which I might add would cost a lot of our taxpayer dollars. And as a taxpayer of the Commonwealth of Virginia, I'd rather have our money go to schools or better roads than to have a frivolous investigation by our State Attorney General. There are more important things that we need to do. So members of the board, I encourage you strongly on behalf of the Virginia Youth and College Division. You've already heard our state president give our statements, but I wanted to tell you something as the only youth person that is actually standing here before this board to tell you, you have the power to not turn back the clock on our voting rights. Don't carry us back to old Virginia.
And I'm the resident of Virginia for 27 years and a voter in Virginia for 27 years. We just heard from the youth vote, so I'll represent the senior citizen vote. I'm retired, and I'm a retired engineer, and I try to volunteer in my community as much as I can. because I believe we should give back. And part of my volunteering is registering voters. I register voters that I know will never support the views that I support. I don't ask them whether they're going to do, who they're going to vote for. I just register voters. I had the honor last month of registering new citizens. It was the greatest gift that we can give anybody in this country. I was happy to tell them that this was the first gift they got as Americans, to get their voter registration. Please don't do this investigation. We're now going to spend $1.5 million, projected $1.5 million to do all these changes in the registration. I already carry 2 of them. The second one I got was so flimsy, I didn't even know if it was real. We don't need to spend this kind of money. As the young gentleman said, we need to spend money on our schools. We need to spend money on supporting our police, our firemen. Please consider this, because we have a wonderful system here. I have lived in other states, Florida for instance, where the registrars weren't that good, where the Board of Elections wasn't that good. So we have something to be very proud of here. We don't have a record of fraud in this state, and we won't have a record of fraud because our citizens take voting very seriously. We just have to make sure that all of them have the opportunity to vote. Thank you so much.
Conscripted. I volunteered for the United States Army Active Reserve. I volunteered for the Virginia National Guard. During those experiences, I've learned to appreciate what purpose the military really serves. It is to protect the Constitution. I had to take an oath to do that, foreign or domestic. Democracy, to me, the foundation of democracy is really about the right to vote. But for that right, I wouldn't be here in this building, in this state, in this city, the capital of the Confederacy. I honor and respect Confederate veterans because I know what it is to be a veteran. I know what it is to make the sacrifice so others can sit and discuss and work out the details. Any scheme by anybody, as an individual, as a group, as a city, as a state, as a nation, to take that right away by hook or crook, I have sworn to not let that happen. Because once again, I wouldn't be here without the right to vote. Let's just be honest. We have a history, a proud history, and I speak for all. We have a history. We know I wouldn't be here without the right to vote. A lot of these ladies wouldn't be here without the right to vote. We have a history. By hook or crook, we can't go back to that because we have progressed. If I was young enough, I'd go back and do my Vietnam service again for everybody in this room, because I believe in the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands. Don't, in your deliberation, and I respect you, I wouldn't want your job. I don't care what you do, you're going to end up with some enemies. I wouldn't want the job, but you have it, and I respect that you're going to do it to the best of your ability. I would hope, like our Supreme Court Justice, the Chief Justice said, when he deliberates, he's looking for a reason to uphold what was brought before them. And sometimes you got to go off the path and find a way to do what the people wanted. That is the intention of the law. triple zeros. I saw you, sir, and I appreciate your time. I encourage you, do what's best for the people, that's all.